Well, when you try to do dirt to somebody else, it usually blows back in your face. Might take a while. The elements might have to be right, a huge wind gust. But eventually that dirt is going to blow back in your face. Yeah, when you try to do dirt to somebody else. Regrettably, this is something that has been the case. And it's why most of us find ourselves in the predicament that we currently are in. You know, when we use the phrase man, when one man tries to starve out another man, he could potentially starve out that man, but he'll starve too. Yeah. So what we've had in America, in essence, is the starvation games. We've had a particular type of individual try to starve out the rest of folks in America that they don't particularly like. And now we can all look around and enjoy the fact that most of us, not all of us, but most of us, are not doing so well. And this is because when you try to throw dirt at one person, it's going to blow back at you. All of this unnecessary racism that America has been on since the inception, well, eventually that's going to catch up with you. Some would argue, and I wouldn't disagree with them, that it's always caught up to America, just in different ways, at different intervals. You know, this country is in $32 trillion worth of debt. You don't amass $32 trillion worth of debt overnight now, do you? No. See, it was never really profitable. Slavery. Yeah, they created a lot of wealth, but you have to spend a lot too. And you can't let your expenditures exceed what you're bringing in. And it always did. From Jump Street. It's just that certain folks knew how to profit, take their money, put it into other things, generate more money. And then when they passed away, the rest of their family inherited their wealth. I really don't like the argument that certain white conservative Americans make about why reparations is not necessary or due to black Americans. It's a really nonsensical argument, if you ask me, because it's predicated on this whole, well, the folks who enslaved people are long dead and gone. Okay. I won't dispute with you on that. But you do know how currency works, right? Currency doesn't die. Yeah. If I invest something into something and it generates wealth, I could be gone, but the wealth is still going to be generated from the investments that I made, right? You notice how they don't talk about the money component of it. Because then folks would have to admit that they inherited enslavement money, right? They have to admit that that money still is generating through the system. Yeah. Now you can't have a principle or a concept called generational wealth and then all of a sudden nut up and get stupid or play stupid, because that's what I think it is. It's just plain stupid. You can't nut up and play stupid then when people tell you that the money that was generated due to slavery is still in the American economy. Yeah. And people whose ancestors weren't compensated for the work that they did, their descendants are owed that money. You can't try to pretend like that's not a reality. I mean, you could, but we all see how that's working out thus far outside. Not so well. I don't think it's going to get any better either, you know. Because the law of the universe is that if you owe something, you have to pay it. That's a universal law. That's not my law. That's not any one particular person's law. That's a universal law. If you owe something, you have to pay it. This country, it owes Black Americans, and it has to pay that debt. Yeah, it has to. It's a debt that it owes. And folks can be upset, angry, stomp their feet, make wild, salacious claims that aren't relevant, but at the end of the day, a debt that's owed has to be repaid. Now, America as a country, when you owe this bitch money, she does something to you, right? She'll send out collectors to collect whatever debt that you owe. And then she'll tack on interest on what you owe. Telling you. Look it up. Don't take my word for it. Look it up. So America is all about getting what it owes. But when it comes to paying back its debts that it owes its citizenry, then it's pussyfooting around and dragging their feet and why do certain folks keep bringing that up kind of thing? Well, it wouldn't be a topic of conversation if it weren't a topic of conversation. Meaning it wouldn't be a thing if it had been taken care of, right? This is not something that's really new. I mean, it is to folks in contemporary times, but it's kind of been a topic of discussion ever since emancipation. Yeah. That's when the discussion really started. Now, suppose I owed someone a favor or some type of monetary transaction. I owed them. And every time the person saw me, they would be like, you owe me, when are you going to pay me? And I would have to keep coming up with different reasons as to why I couldn't do it. Eventually, the person who I owe is gonna not want to hear any more excuses, right? Because they know I owe them and I know I owe them. And I keep making excuses. But eventually, that person you owe is going to be tired of the excuses. Now, generally when someone gets tired of excuses, they tend to, well, they can act in a whole range of ways. And the person who owes the debt really can't be upset about it either. And now, certain folks say, well, America can't pay its debts. That's a deeper discussion. Can America pay its debts or not? Depends on what you mean by paying its debts. Yeah. Because say I owe you something that I can't afford to pay you. I can make arrangements. Say, look, I'll pay you X amount here, X amount there, X amount here, there. Yeah. Happens all the time. Commonly referred to as payment plans, payment arrangement plans. Because I hear some people saying it's an affordability issue. Now, I've never said anything about lump sums, how much, any of that kind of stuff. You know, people will go and take what you say out of proportion and twist it and try to make it something you didn't say. We talked about a debt owed and a debt needing to be repaid. That's an agreement that America would have to make with Black Americans. The terms and conditions of how they want to repay. That's out of my scope. Huh? But I don't think people are unreasonable. See, this is where the kind of thinking you can insult people's intelligence comes from. Most people are not unreasonable. Most people say, look, if you owe me some money and you can't pay the full thing, break it up. This year pay this much, next year pay this. Yeah, that's how most people function and think. I haven't heard anybody say, break the American economy, break the bank. Because at the end of the day, you just want your debt to be repaid. Yeah. Borrowing money to repay a debt, is that smart? Well, borrowing money, if you need to do it, is not a bad thing. No, it's never a bad thing to borrow money. Somebody's going to tell you it is, but somebody doesn't know what they're talking about, because that's all that really credit is. It's borrowed money. Yeah, it's delayed payment. That's what credit is. Now, if you put a lot of things on your credit and you cannot pay for it in a timely manner, we'll add that. That could be problematic. Could be. Doesn't have to be, but it could become problematic. Because remember, interest is accrued on any debt. So the more you don't meet the minimum payment, the more you don't pay, the more interest is accrued. That's why a lot of times it takes folks forever to pay even the principal, because they're always constantly paying the interest. Yeah. But borrowing money isn't necessarily a bad thing to do, as long as you pay it back. Some people say in a timely fashion. Well, what does that really mean, in a timely fashion? Because that's open to your interpretation. When a person is thinking it's a timely fashion, it's probably tomorrow. And what you're thinking in a timely fashion might be in 3 weeks. So that's always open to interpretation. But a timely fashion is definitely not 400 years. Yeah. And so they've been kicking this can down the road. And there is no more road to kick it down. Yeah, there's no more road left to kick the can. To me, from the naked observation, it looks like it's starvation games. Because you can't ever fault somebody for coming up, continuing to prod and poke you about something you know you owe them. That's never going to be something that you could really be upset that an individual or a group does. That's bound to happen. And like I said, America does it as a country. Every year you have to pay taxes. Period. So I think it's a little bit kind of messed up that a country will tell you, pay what you owe on a yearly basis. But they've had a debt for 4 centuries that they refuse to pay. You all don't think that's messed up? I kind of do. And really, this is not necessarily a white conservative, white liberal, black conservative, black liberal kind of thing. I mean, you can make it that, but it's not really that thing. This is America, the country, owing a debt to people it profited off of through enslavement. Period. That's what it is. So when white conservative Americans say they don't believe in reparations, well, then you must believe that a country can enslave people, not pay them, profit from it, and then somehow you think something magical and good is going to happen to that country. I don't know. Interesting notion to have. I don't know. It violates a universal concept, which is exploitation. You know, exploitation is not something that's universally condoned by anything. Yeah, something that exploits you is not universally condoned. Yeah, so that's a violation. Nobody would argue that enslavement of people for centuries wasn't a violation, wasn't exploitation. So how are we sitting here now going to the point of exploitation, bad, but a country that benefited from exploitation, good? Like, how do you get from point A to point B with that one? So what I think white conservatives should do is explain why they're opposed to reparations in a logical way, because to me, I haven't heard a good argument. Yeah, I haven't heard a good argument. Yeah. Like Sean Connery, I'm waiting to be impressed. Because to me, what it looks like they're for is starvation. Here goes some of the same folks that are like complaining about inflation now. But inflation has always been a thing in the American society for folks that didn't have shit, right? It's not a new thing. If I can't afford something at $3, I most certainly can't afford it at $9. You could afford it at $3, but now that it's gone to $6, it's causing you difficulty. If it goes to $9, you can't afford it. But you don't give a damn about the people that can't afford it at $3. See, this is how Americans are. It's only about them. It's not about anyone else. somehow nobody was unhoused before COVID. You know, according to the numbers, that's not true. They ran the numbers in California, the most populous state in our union. Prior to COVID, 6 in 10 black Californians were unhoused. That's the majority. 6 in 10. That's the majority. 60% of black Californians prior to COVID were unhoused. Now we know it's probably like 9 in 10, right? So white conservative Americans intellectually do a disservice to themselves when they claim that this is not necessarily about race, because it is with them. Why else wouldn't they support reparations if it's not about race? Kind of like 1 + 1 = 2. If you owe someone a debt, which America does, then you have to pay the debt. It's just that simple. Now, if you add race into it, then it becomes about race. So it was noteworthy when recently Tucker Carlson talked to Ice Cube, and Ice Cube told him this is not really about race. A lot of people were upset on both spectrums, left and right, about what he said. But if you really listen objectively, seek first to understand, then to be understood, he was absolutely correct. It's not about race. It's an economic principle. If you owe a person something, you pay it, regardless of how they move, where they come from, who they are. Period. You pay it. Yeah. If I owe a Japanese person money, I don't care if he's Japanese, I have to pay it. Also, because folks are so racist in America, he also knew the audience he was talking to. He's talking to white conservative audience. And with them, even though they say everything doesn't have to be about race, everything invariably always does come back to race with them. Tell me when it hasn't. I'll wait. Because here goes the group that says we shouldn't make everything about race, but then they subsist, their entire base subsists off of racism. They do nothing but scapegoating, to the point where they have people run up from different parts of a country that they don't even live in and go into grocery stores and Dollar Generals and shoot people because of how they look. Come on, tell the truth. Was he the dude that just went in Jacksonville? Wasn't he a Trump supporter? Wasn't he Make America First? Make America Great? Wasn't he one of those folks? Come on, tell the truth. Wasn't he listening to Nick Fuentes? So when they say that it's all about all of us together and we're all Americans, well, apparently that memo hasn't been passed on to them folks. See, that's why I don't buy what they say, because I know they're full of bullshit. have to talk about that separately, but you all, they make everything about race. And then when you say everything is about race, then they say you're being a racist. But no, you're invariably a racist as well. I'd be like, who isn't a racist in America? Because everything is about race in America. Yeah, everything. To the point where we can't even come to a reasonable conclusion that when you owe someone, regardless of their race, a debt, you have to pay it. You don't have to like the person that you're paying the debt to. And you can't start pocket watching, as the kids say. You know, I found it kind of in poor taste what Dr. Phil has said, and I talked about it briefly. But he's like, when you give any group of people that type of money, they waste it, or it'll be wasted. Now, he knows better. In my opinion, he knows better. First and foremost, is it up to him to determine that if a country owes you a debt, just not pay it because, well, certain folks or a lot of people will waste it? Is that up to his determination to make? Can I just not pay back a debt that I owe someone because I just make a claim that, oh, if I pay it back to you, you'll waste it? Can your employer, when you go to work and you're supposed to get paid every week or 2 weeks, just say, I'm not going to pay you your paycheck because you'll spend it on booze, you'll waste it on some drugs? Can I say that to you? Yeah, so that's the first point. Second point is this. What constitutes wasting? Because a lot of Americans have a lot of possessions, you know. They hoard a lot of things. People, rich people buy yachts, mansions. Is that a waste? People buy Lamborghinis. Is that a waste? People buy designer bags, Rolex watches. Is that a waste? No, it's what the individual wants. So I said in response to that, black Americans can do whatever the hell they want to with their money. Period. Yeah. If some people want to, whatever they constitute as wasting, whatever that is, go ahead. One man's trash is another man's treasure, right? So if somebody just wants to waste all their money on Gucci, Prada, Louis, hey, Gucci, Prada, and Louis are going to make a lot of money, right? Stands to reason. Yeah, I didn't really get that concept, what he was trying to say. Because he's not saying that it's not owed. He's just saying, well, if you give any group of people, and that's not even true. Historically, he's not speaking factually correct. See, this is why I don't come on those kind of programs or message these folks with anything, because historically he's not speaking correctly. When Japanese Americans were compensated for their internment, they received $20,000 apiece. Now go and ask any Japanese American, did they waste that money? They're not going to tell you they wasted it. when Germany paid restitution for what they did to survivors of the Holocaust? Go and ask any of those survivors, did they waste that money? When Armenians were paid restitution for the genocide, go and ask the Armenians, did they waste that money? So I didn't really get the gist of what he was saying. Besides, he was trying to slyly come up with a way to skirt around a principle that you can't skirt around, which is when you owe something, you pay what you owe. You know, they waited almost to the last minute to raise the debt ceiling in this country. And it seems to be what Americans are on, where if you owe something, they just are like, oh, well, I don't have to pay it. Cool, maybe you think you don't, but I don't know. To me, you pay your debts. Law of the universe is you pay your debts. Yeah. Bad things happen when you don't pay your debts. Nothing good is going to happen for this country until that debt is paid, period. Nothing. You mark my words, nothing good is going to happen because they're in violation of a universal principle. And they know it. The government structure in this country knows they're in violation. Nothing good is going to happen. And the citizenry who's opposed to it, nothing good is going to happen for them either. Because they're in the country. So it would be in everyone's best interest, regardless of whether you like or dislike black people, to get your government to pay back its debt it owes. Yeah, that's in everybody's best interest, believe it or not. Because I can tell you, nothing good is going to happen. When you try to do fuck shit to somebody else, that shit's going to blow back on you. And see, that's what America has been on. Wanting to do fuck shit to other people and thinking it's not going to reverberate back on them. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. Never has, never will. Sorry to break that news to folks, but kind of should have been now. Yeah, you have the starvation games. This is the starvation game. Yeah, it's not going to go good for America or Americans, period. Regardless of your ethnicity, it's not going to go well for anybody. There are no excuses because if I owe you something, I have to pay. That's it. Even if I have to borrow the money, I still have to pay you and then pay back my borrow. Let me give you an example. When America fought its first civil war, they didn't have the money for that. The South didn't have the money and the North didn't have the money. How do you fight a war and you have no money? You borrow money, right? So the North was financed by the Lords of London. This is a fact. Go and look it up. Go and check the paperwork. See, they don't tell you all shit. But just because they don't tell you shit doesn't mean it's not readily available. The North was financed by the Lords of London. And the South was financed by certain elements of the British Empire. Yeah. Can you imagine Americans fighting a war that they can't even finance on their own? So they have to borrow money to fight a war amongst themselves. It wasn't until 1993 that the state of Arkansas finished paying back its Civil War debt. Yeah, did you not know that? Ooh, you said, that's something I never heard before. Yeah, I know. There's a lot of shit you all have never heard before. 1993 is when the state of Arkansas completely paid back the debt it owed due to its Civil War in 1860. Yeah, 1861 to be exact. Yeah, 1993. Think about that. 1861 to 1993. That's a long time to repay back a debt, right? Huh? Long time. And you know, when we were doing that virtual rally and we talked about this in Baltimore, the slave holders in Baltimore and D.C. under the Lincoln administration, they received reparations for loss of property. Yeah. So the United States government paid ex-slave holders at the time reparations for loss of property. But before you begrudge this, it wasn't the case that Lincoln didn't want everybody to be fully compensated. It was the case that racist Americans, like the slaveholders, didn't want black Americans to get their fair share. Yeah. Which has always been the case, because you had the Trump administration, once he lost the trade war with China, put all the white farmers in Iowa and Alabama and Mississippi off on both titties of the United States government to the tune of 80% of all of their income, and didn't give any money to the black farmers. So when our current president tried to right that wrong, you know what the white farmers did? Instead of being grateful that they got theirs from their racist ex-president, they went to court and said the Biden administration is discriminating on the basis of race. They're just saying that the black farmers should get money, when they knew that Trump had already given them money and excluded the black farmers. See, this is how racist America is, and how racist the citizenry is. Now, if you think anything good is going to happen to folks like that, boy, you're deceiving yourself. You really are. So just about everything that could go wrong for America is going to go wrong for this country. Period. Because that's the vibe that people are on. And as long as you're on that type of vibe that you want to starve out one group, you're going to starve too. It's just a universal law. When you throw dirt at somebody else, it's going to blow back at you. So don't pretend as citizens that you don't know why you're in the boat you're in. We all know why we're in this boat. We all do. People want to pretend and shit. You know, people are fake and phonies. Real people know. And there are plenty of real people that know. And I'm never going to fault anybody who's owed money running up on people and telling them, you owe me money. Because if it were me and somebody owed me money, I would do the same thing. Period. Yeah. And if it were white conservatives and someone owed them money, they would do the same thing. So there's no sense in begrudging black Americans. You know, I hear white conservatives, they love to make these TikTok videos where they disparage reparations. But you know, they're a bunch of inheritance babies. Yeah, most of them are inheritance babies. They didn't work to get what they have. They inherited all that shit. Now here's the kicker. Many of them don't even know if the money they inherited was generated from enslavement. They'll say it wasn't, but how do they know? That's like folks that say, I'm a pure blood. But I'm like, everybody has been sleeping with everybody, so how do you know you're pure? Fuck out of here with that shit. Money is not something that's static, it's currency. That's why they call it currency, because it's electric, it's always moving. You're telling me if you invested, if your family invested in a financial institution, you know, many of these financial institutions profited from enslavement. Yeah. So you're telling me if you invested in that, you're not necessarily a part of earning off the back of enslavement? Really? That's interesting. They say, well, nobody's around still that enslaved people, so nobody's still around that wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution either, but folks still claim that they benefit from that too, right? Nobody's around that authored the Bible and the Quran and the Torah, but folks still claim that they believe in those things, right? So this is an argument predicated off of solely racism. A lot of Americans have a deep disdain for black Americans. I'm not saying that's a right or a wrong thing. I'm just telling you what it is. That's the thing that it is. And that disdain blinds you to common sense and reason. Which the reasonable thing is, if you owe a debt, you pay it. Regardless of who you owe it to. Yeah. I could hate somebody's guts, but if I owe them, I gotta pay them. I might be like, they're gonna use the money to do something bad to somebody else. Well, doesn't matter. I owe them. Whatever they use the money for, that's on them. It no longer is my problem. It's no longer my problem, right? Yeah. So they can't even use that argument. You know, they don't really have too many excuses, conservatives. Generally, the excuse is they just don't want to do anything. Have you heard anybody say it's not a debt owed? No. Dr. Phil didn't say that. No congressman has said that. You had a senator say the Civil War, fighting the Civil War, was the repayment of debt. Now that's interesting. Because he came from a Republican. He was a Republican. The reason I say that's interesting is because we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? That's what's written on the paper. But that's not what people did. So how can you say based off of a conflict that arose based off of you not abiding by what you wrote in the first place, that's restitution? No. See, nobody checked him for saying that. Yeah, that's bogus of him to say that. You can't say after you fuck up and you try to fix your fuck up that's the restitution for your fuck up. Yeah, that wasn't restitution. Yeah, so, a lot of times they'll say those kind of things, Republicans and governance, because they really don't want to come out and have to tell you all. That this is a debt owed and they're going to have to pay it. Now the state approach is interesting. California said, look, we'll set up a task force and we'll make determinations and come to some type of determination. Sounds good, cool beans. Let's say California does everything the task force decides. You know what they'll do, right? Conservatives, they'll say, well, California did it, so if the blue states want to do it, no sweat off our backs. But there's just one little problem with this. Slavery wasn't a blue state, red state thing. It was an American thing. So you can't say, well, California, Oregon, Washington, Illinois, New York, they'll do it, but Florida, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, they won't. No. It's all fine and dandy if the government is slow walking that the states do something in the interim. That's fine and dandy. But ultimately, the federal government is going to have to pay. Because enslavement was something that was condoned by the United States government. Yeah, it was condoned. It was sanctioned by the entirety of the Republic. Sure, some states broke away, some states were free and enslaved. But the process that was sanctioned and condoned by the entire nation for centuries. So you gotta watch the over for the under there. Because they'll say, oh, it's a blue state issue and the red states don't want to do this, and they'll try to make it political. There were elements that were political then and now. But what I'm telling you is the nation, the republic, the entirety of the republic owes the descendants of those who were enslaved restitution for what their ancestors didn't receive. You're really going to say if folks live in Alabama, they don't get what they're owed, but if you live in California, you do? Yeah. I mean, maybe the most severe karma is taken off of those states, but you're still going to have a karmic negative energy over the entire republic. Like I said, there's no half and half doing this. You gotta do it completely. Yeah, it's good that California and some other states might do it that way, but that doesn't obfuscate the government from its responsibility. Yeah. Look, folks can have their opinions. Somebody said folks can have opinions. Folks can have opinions. Opinions are welcome. I'm telling you how the universe works. You don't get out of debts that you owe. That's a universal principle. Also, a universal principle is if you try to starve out or do something fucked towards someone else, it's going to blow back on you eventually. Yeah, eventually it will. And now that we're all in accountability season, I really would be hesitant to do shit. But you know, there's always those people that do. And, you know, me personally, there's things that I kinda do, and then there's things that I know not to do. And one of them is not messing around with the universe. Because none of us are bigger than that. And so when you're in violation of universal concepts and laws, that's never going to be good for you. As the governance structure, as a republic, as citizens, that's never going to be good for folks. And what I can tell you is America is in violation. They know it. And making excuses is not going to change that violation. Period. Yeah. And half-assing it is not going to change it either. Because I can only imagine white conservatives will say, well, it's going to be a blue state versus red state thing. And trying to act as though the entire country didn't exploit black Americans during enslavement. You know, the people that exploit it the most is the South. And they're going to not want to do anything. Yeah, think about that. the biggest exploiters are not going to want to do anything. Also, why you're going to have the federal government step in. Yeah. It is what it is. Yeah. We all know. But yeah, think about that, you all. Starving somebody else out. And then you end up starving too. Yeah. Sometimes you can have so much hatred towards something that it blinds you to good judgment and reason. Yeah. And I think that's kind of where we're at. Because good judgment and reason leads to doing what's necessary. Yeah, we'll have to talk about that. I heard what he said. Like, that's a separate thing. At issue, a person that owes you cannot tell you how they're going to choose to give you what they owe you. You got to be very careful with that kind of concept. If I owe someone money, I can't tell the person I owe, well, I don't want to give you money, I'll give you groceries. Person, oh, wait a minute, maybe I don't want the groceries. I want to make my own determination because people are grown-ass adults. So when he said, maybe not cash, but we'll do land, you all know who I'm talking about. Firstly, that sounded crazy to me because you don't have land for millions of Americans. Secondly, everybody doesn't want land. Thirdly, everybody's not a farmer. Lastly, if you let the person who hasn't paid the debt all this time dictate how they're going to pay the debt, not in the way that you're instructing them to pay it, do you really think they're going to give you something that's going to be beneficial to you? So he says, we'll give land. But the land will be some land that nobody wants. You can't grow shit on it. So you got to be careful with those kinds of things. People are grown-ass adults. Here's a grown-ass adult telling other folks he knows best what they need. One person going to tell 50 million people what they need. See, that's crazy. To summarize, that's crazy. Yeah, what was being withheld from people was cash. So how are you going to tell people, we're not going to pay you what was being withheld from you, we're going to give you something else? That's not the right of the government to tell you what you deserve, what you need. Yeah, that's not their right. And if folks do want land, which some folks probably will, a simple way around that is if you give folks cash, they can buy their own land, right? Yeah, people can spend it whatever the way they want to. You can't just assume that everybody is a one-size-fits-all shoe for 50 million people. That's crazy. I saw him say that. You gotta watch that kind of shit.